Hello! From the dark of this room, I decided to go for the next lesson that, as the syllabus will show you, is API nightmare. So today I register a cluster of these, and so be ready to see my dark half face because I don't have really a YouTube setup today. So I hope you appreciate anyway the content and not really how fancy is all graphics. So API nightmare, what I mean by that? When you're talking about API in terms of attacking, you need to consider that first of all is everything in application between front end and back end is anyway discussing most of the time through API. It makes possible to scale to third parties and this one was possible even before with SOAP and other way of interconnecting web layers. But with API, we got a big potential at the very beginning with REST, and right now with API GraphQL kind. You need to pay attention on the fact that first half of the talk I'm discussing from an infrastructure perspective and not from a web app application pen testing. So from an infrastructure perspective, you always land as a first things on the most external layer of your infrastructure. So if your DNS entry is going to be resolved with a CDN, you should expect to have a CDN endpoint, if it doesn't just forward everything, to be capable to deal with API and so become a public API gateway. An API gateway is supposed to be your first layer of defense, and so is the one that does have a Swagger file or something with a definition of what is expected from the API in terms of method, in terms of structure of each field, each parameter, and is actually your defensive layer. So it's always important when you talk about infrastructure that you think where you are landing. And you'll see these two scenarios that I describe as completely the opposite. One, you are having an API and a CDN, and the CDN is properly configured to not be bypassed because it's having a side shield or a serve IP pool to make it. And the other point is instead you are publishing an API endpoint within a Kubernetes cluster into a pod. So see these two infrastructure design and think how difficult is for an attacker to pass through the CDN and discover what is your data center, what is your on-prem, or what is your cloud estate that is shielded by the CDN, and land something different than actually an endpoint, an API talking endpoint. If you do compromise straight an API endpoint that it doesn't use an API gateway like the one that I described with a pod publishing an API endpoint, you'll find quite easy that at the time that you fudge the API, you are already in the most juicy place where to escalate the privilege and actually take over uh, and go around in terms of lateral move. So first concept infrastructure wise, you need an API gateway. An API gateway should be well set up to divide and in any way distinguish between public API and private API. There are hybrid approach between API gateway where they actually be capable to route traffic between public and private in a way where the API gateway is capable to understand which kind of traffic. So API gateway generally as a product can have a CDN integration like an APG that can be in cloud or can be on-prem. I take the example of APG, but it doesn't change if it's a Kong, for example. Now, think what it does mean in terms of attacking the fact that you land in on-prem. Straight away, you are subject to DDoS. And so always consider what is the most external layer, where is landing, is an API gateway, it does get any protection. If it's a cloud service, do you pay if you get a DDoS? For example, in services like APG, there was a time, I'm not 100% sure it's still the same, where an API, a DDoS was anyway traffic to an API endpoint, and so you would have been paying for that. New product like APG X right now is having built-in also a web application firewall in front that actually protect from the DDoS. So as you see, there was always an evolution. In terms of Kong, it doesn't change the structure because it's still an API gateway. So when you have an incident, API are brilliant because actually attackers poke the API and hammer, almost sure that the SOC doesn't see it. The reason is the amount of logs an API is massive. REST API are chatty, a lot of traffic, a lot of cost. So let's keep in mind that API is really good due to the volume for an attacker because most of the time is outside the SOC visibility. So you as a defender, you need to care about it. And so you need an API gateway, and the API gateway, what it will do will be the gateway for all API endpoint, and it will let you to see in one spot all entries. Plus, we'll have secret management that will the token are extremely important in API. Let's take an example. You are having an Android app, you reverse engineer that, you take out the token, the API token, and you start to poke the front end, back end of the application. At that stage, all that traffic is obviously all the time having the right token, and because it was built in into the app. The main problem what was the obfuscation, the APK was possible to be reversed, the token extract and used. But doesn't change that you should have that visibility. You should be into a CDN or at least having a CDN in front to be capable to filter that, parse attack at any layer, because don't forget that DDoS is not only network connectivity one, can be also a slow DDoS from an application standing point. So it's extremely important that you think about the API gateway, understand which security you have. Do you have a web application firewall in front or you don't? You see a case for that or you don't? It's open to conversation, but they are serving different purpose. So obviously at the time that you need a web application firewall, you need to be sure that see the certificate and the traffic. So that is the reason why an API gateway should have a really high standard in terms of capabilities from a security standing point. Okay. When you have done that, you have mapped the infrastructure, you know where it is, and which layer you do have in place. At that stage, you need to be 100% sure that you distinguish public and private because you don't want a public endpoint to be compromised and be capable to do call to another network area through an API. That's it's ridiculous, but it's what it can happen. And so you need to be 100% sure that if you route and you have segregate the public and the private API, even if it looks like a standard statement, you see with experience that from a programming standing point, sometimes there are mismatch on this stuff. Everything is microservices, everything is supposed to be facing externally. Sometimes there are mismatch between front end and back end service, and you can find some funny games. So become knowledgeable about API. API is a big chunk of security, and it's critical because API is about everything. You can go API for IoT, API for web services, exposure to SDN, SD-wan, so be capable to inject even commands to a device, change routing, because right now network is at layer 7 and everything is an API. You do have interface and API in SDN that are having the southbound that specific target to to send command. So you can understand how critical it is in your thinking. Always map the API, try to centralize into a gateway. Be sure to have that gateway dumping and connected to your SOC visibility, and let's never have an endpoint straight into a pod. Always have an API gateway. That's critical. That's critical because a privilege escalation isn't rare into a container. So if it does happen, you get screwed, and you shouldn't. So think ahead, be sure to divide the service, have the right segregation, use service mesh, and use properly API gateway. They are there, they cost you nothing, you can get a Kong, whatever you fancy, but just use it. And configure it in the same manner, and be 100% sure to follow OWASP top 10 isn't my best because there is way more, but in terms of API, the documentation that they wrote is extremely good. So use that the OWASP API top 10 and look into that, but make a distinguish between REST and GraphQL. GraphQL is complicated. You are having a query language. By default, your API endpoint can even suggest you which parameter you should use it. Obviously, it depends on the configuration of the verbosity. Is like any service. If it's misconfigured, it doesn't is not fit for purpose. But what I'm trying to say is learn the difference between REST and GraphQL. What you see here is the best YouTube video. Is just 1 hour really well spent. Fair play to the fella Matt that did an excellent job with this video. Is don't think that due to the fact that it's 2019 isn't actually hitting the nail in the head. It's fantastic this video. Dedicate time to that because you don't understand how GraphQL is fantastic for hacking. So what is the external layer infrastructure wise? Always focus to keep the attacker more far away where you want. Map your endpoint. Be 100% sure to not publish straight into endpoint, and configure it using a Swagger file. Be sure that it can be fuzz. Test it. If you use a hybrid, use mutual TLS across two different API gateway to recognize each other. Like that, you reduce the attack surface because you always know which who is calling what. But that is critical, and you close the attack surface. It's not a guarantee that doesn't get broken, but for sure reduce a bit the surface. And distinguish REST, GraphQL. REST, a lot of verbose, GraphQL, more way to attack it. Think about it. Actually, right now, GraphQL was seen as the panacea of everything, is everywhere. It does have really great capabilities in terms of um, connecting endpoints, but it's starting to be problematic in terms of query. You could create a query and get a tons of data behind. Don't forget in API security, the secret management, always, 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 and always evolve. Don't reinvent the wheel. Don't have uh, secrets that never get renewed. Rotation is key. And this talk is about API nightmare. Nightmare because, as you saw, we were talking about a mobile application, just a reversing an APK. You get the right way to poke the kingdom. Don't do that. Always think and do threat modeling. Consider the obfuscation of the application, the fact that the token where is hard coded, avoid hard coding if you can, rotate, and do well your threat modeling. Don't forget DNS pinning in the picture, mutual TLS when it is needed. Be sure that the method that you allow makes sense. There are two HTTP verb mode that are nasty, even if are simple, are nasty. Put and delete. With put, you can create a file on the file system, and one of the main reasons why the API gateway help you is also the fact that you don't expose directly the endpoint. But it does matter at the time that you allow that. And so put and delete need a lot of thinking. Delete obviously can cancel data. And if your API is misconfiguring somehow, you can do a lot of damages. Okay? You'll uh, you'll have a long career. Step by step, you see how API is not into all threat modeling, especially in cloud service. The management API is not nowadays taking the same importance that back in the days was having the management VLAN. The API management access is what in on-prem is the management VLAN. You need to think a lot on how to design it, how to make sure to have visibility of that, how that can screw you a career. You are an infrastructure consultant, you need to be capable to see the full picture. If you talk about a web service and you forget about the API, you are not due diligent. And that is the most important things for a professional. Due diligence. Okay? Subscribe if you like the video, and I hope you enjoy the content, and keep it up. We are going through all syllabus. You see that piece by piece, you'll have a big picture that you don't find in many lessons that you hear around. There are tons of courses that are web application focus, other more pen testing from a network perspective. Here, I'm trying to connect the dot. Infrastructure is something tangible. Everything is infrastructure. Doesn't matter if you run an on-prem, a cloud, an hybrid private, or whatever. It's always an infrastructure. That's the target that I had with this course. Create original content and give you the big picture. Thanks for tuning, and subscribe so you'll know when the next video is out. Take care. Bye bye.